everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
So you want to make your graffiti pop off of walls. There's one way to do it that a lot of graffiti artists are not taking advantage of. And that's going to be what we teach in today's video with 3 tips all about making your graffiti look more 3-dimensional. Now for this, we got some amazing work to break down, and they're going to be in the description down below as well. But check this out. This whole entire thing that we're doing here is kind of part of a little mini-series, if you will, where last week we talked about how to choose your fill-in colors. And next week, we're going to be coming out with a full color theory breakdown and tutorial and teaching how that applies to graffiti. That way you'll have all the tools you need to be confident when doing your fill-ins. So in today's video, we're talking all about how to make things pop with some nice, beautiful shading. And one of the very first ways we could do this is with a very simple drop shadow. Drop shadows are a basic technique that we all learn early on in graffiti, and we have a tutorial for it right up here in the cards and in the description down below. And that's all they're doing. That's all this shadow bit is underneath. It's just a drop shadow. But because they understand a little bit about how values and forms and light works, they know that they can do 2 things to make this shadow a lot more impactful. Number 1, they can push the distance from the shadow further from the piece. And we get to see a great example of it right here. Look at how far the tip of this letter structure is from the actual drop shadow itself. Normally in graffiti, if we were to go ahead and do a drop shadow, let's say we were going to do it over here, then we would position that shadow right beside the letter, as I'm doing now. And this gives us a pretty flat looking image. Now granted, it works for what graffiti needs it to work for, but it doesn't really result in all that much depth. By pushing the shadow further away from the actual letter itself, you suggest that the actual letter structures are lifted off of the surface. They're lifted off of the wall, and they're further away from that wall, which is what causes that distance between those 2 points. The next thing that they do is that they make the shadow more fuzzy. They don't give us a hard edge with a shadow. Now, if you guys have been finding this video helpful, then you're gonna love the book we came out with in the description down below. It'll teach you each one of graffiti's fundamentals like no other book on the market does. We're the only one that goes over all of graffiti's fundamentals, and we have a plethora of illustrations for just about everything, not to mention the fact that we go in depth on all of these topics. Pick up a digital ebook version on our online store, theartistblock.inc, or a physical copy over on Amazon. I got a link to that in the description down below. Tip number 2. In this piece, we don't see much shading underneath the actual letter structures themselves. There's more so an exterior detail, a bit of a glow with this purple, and then these wisps of smoke that shoot off in different directions. So we're not really able to see any shadow, and they don't really utilize much of a shadow, if any at all. So how are they conveying a good amount of depth here? Well, they're prioritizing their contrast, and they're prioritizing the actual shading of the structures themselves. So in this case, if we were to just break this down to a simple cylinder, let's go ahead and just draw that really quick. This cylindrical form here has a proper light family right in this area over here, and then it's got a proper shadow family in this area right over here. And then they proceed to follow the actual anatomy of how light works for different forms. So they have their midtones, they have their highlight, which actually has this vein kind of running right across a lot of it. Then they have their actual core shadow right here, followed by their rim light, which normally that's where reflective light would go, but rim lights and reflective lights are a little bit different. Rim lights occur as a second light source, as to reflective light is more so residual leftover light that bounces into an area, so it wouldn't be nearly this bright. And this is important to note because reflective light can't be as light as anything inside of the light family. So if this were a reflective light, then it would not be able to be as light as anything inside this area here. And it is, which means that this cannot be a reflective light, this has to be a rim light. And they drew that well because, well, what do you know? There's another light source behind the letters. We can clearly see that in various areas. In this image, they're using contrast beautifully, where they have this orange fill-in, and then they have this purple light emanating from behind the letters. Now, they're contrasting 2 different ways here. Not only from value, where you have light areas like this part right here, that immediately come in contact with darker areas like here, and this happens all throughout the piece. You can see it again right here where this light area comes in contact with this dark area in this shaded section, and once again, everywhere else, you'll be able to see that. But then they also contrast color. Because their secondary light source emanating from behind the piece is purple, that purple does well to contrast that orange. So they have some nice purple rim light right there, followed by a nice deep contrasting darker orange. And this also happens throughout the piece, where you have, once again, nice rich light purple next to a nice orange right there, and then more again over here, a nice rich purple contrasting more orange. Keep that at the forefront of your mind when doing your fill-in. There's plenty of different ways you can contrast. We looked at a few last week as well when we broke down some other artwork, and we're about to look at it a little bit more with this piece right here, where they have a predominantly pink kind of fill-in, but they also have these beautiful hints of blue. And they also have a good variety of values as well within these colors, so they're able to contrast dark against light, and dark against light, as well as the warmer color fill-in versus the cool color underbelly of the letters, if you will. This also kind of harkens back to our previous video where we talked about picking your color harmony and being attentive to that, because they have this beautiful green, which leads us to a nice triadic color scheme. The pink is more desaturated, the greens are really vibrant and saturated, and then the blues are also pretty dark in value and saturated. And that also kind of leads right back to the previous tip about contrast. Tip number 3, probably the most important tip that we have to keep in mind, is a consistent light source. And this one might seem pretty obvious, but you'll be surprised at how many people kind of trip up on this one. And it truly is the most important, specifically because if you don't get that part down pat, and your whole image begins to unravel. If you don't have consistent lighting, truly everything falls apart after that point. So know exactly where your primary light source is coming from and be consistent with that. We see that generally speaking, this one is a pretty consistent light source coming from above the letter towards the right hand side, and then he's got a secondary light source coming from the bottom here. I recommend if you're just learning how to shade, then begin with a singular light source, and as you progress, as you get better, as you find that easier and easier, then graduate to a secondary light source. We have a tutorial all about how to shade your graffiti properly right up here in the cards and in the description down below. Check that out if you want a more in-depth about really detailed shading and how light works. But that pretty much wraps up today's video, and that was only just a few tips. Be sure to come back next week for our full-blown color theory tutorial, where we'll teach you all about color theory and how that applies to graffiti. We'll be talking about interior details, fill-in, 3D, exterior details, everything. Now, if you're at the point in graffiti where you're still learning the letter structures and you're still getting a handle on the basics, or if you're more advanced and you're looking to deepen your knowledge about the fundamentals, check out our book in the description down below. We have digital ebooks over at theartistblock.inc with physical copies over on Amazon. It'll teach you everything you need to know about graffiti's general fundamentals. And be sure to check out our How to Do Graffiti playlist right over here with more graffiti content right down here. And I'll catch you guys back here next week. Thanks for watching.